we're going to meet a graduate of the School of Hard Knocks. How many of you feel like you've got a degree or two from the School of Hard Knocks? Anybody here? Okay, quite a few of you. What I'm going to say is probably everybody does, okay? Maybe you didn't realize you went to the School of Hard Knocks, but most of us do. Now, here's a couple of things I want to say about the School of Hard Knocks, and that is that that some of the time someone else enrolled us in the School of Hard Knocks. In other words, because of somebody else's behavior or because of somebody else's decision, we ended up going through a hard time. You know, it could be a family member that made some really bad decisions, and you suffered right along with them. And it could be an employer that made some bad decisions, and you suffered right along with them. And so not every time that you're admitted into the School of Hard Knocks is because you made a bad decision or you did something. Sometimes it's because you got enrolled by somebody else. It wasn't your plan. It wasn't on your agenda. And then there are those times when we just simply enroll ourselves. We do something dumb, and we walk right into the School of Hard Knocks, and we take some action or some behavior or some plan, and we kind of make a mess of it, and so we get to go through the School of Hard Knocks. Now, I believe I remember I have a medical doctor friend. I used to pastor him in Kansas City, and he became a very dear friend of mine. And Dr. Hinthorn was not only smart from a standpoint of science and that kind of thing, but he's also a very wise person spiritually, and had a lot of good insights. And I don't remember who we were talking about in the Bible or whatever, but we were talking about how we best learn lessons. We were in a group setting. We were talking about how we best learn lessons, and someone was saying, well, it seems like the best lessons are learned in the School of Hard Knocks or through life, through experience, through your mistakes. Those are the best lessons. And he said, well, no, I'm going to beg to differ with you on that. He said, he wasn't being ugly or anything else, but he said, I think the best way to learn is learn from other people's School of Hard Knocks, or learn from things other people go through. So you don't have to go through it. You observe it from them, and you learn that lesson, and then you avoid having to go through that school. You know, and I've thought about that quite a few times since then. And here's my conclusion from that, and that is this. That would be ideal. But I can't say that I've met hardly anybody. In fact, I'm not sure that I have met anybody that has been so wise or so good that they learned from everybody else's mistakes and didn't make some themselves. So I don't think the School of Hard Knocks is something you can avoid. But I would say this: you don't have to make it a lifetime pursuit. Okay, you can hopefully. Here's what I would say: at least you don't want to enroll in the same class over and over again. If you keep enrolling, hopefully it's a new class, and you maybe get to the graduate level, get your PhD in it, or something like that. You know, where you're actually moving forward. So, but today we're going to talk about Moses, and Moses is a individual who is probably one of the most, without doubt, one of the most significant persons that's talked about in the Bible. The work he accomplished was one of the most significant tasks given to anyone in the Bible, and he was an amazing leader. In fact, many of the things that he instituted from a standpoint of leading a nation are the very things that actually even our nation is based on. And so this is a person who God gifted tremendously. But I will tell you, he didn't get there easily, and he didn't get there without some hiccups along the way. And even when he was in the saddle leading well, he still had some problems. I just wonder, you don't have to raise your hand on this, but I wonder if you have ever wondered when you're going to get to the smooth sailing point in life. You know, when you're going to get to that point where it's just smooth sailing. Have you ever, I mean, don't raise your hand. I'm not, this isn't a, because I kind of know that this is sort of a thing in life. This is something we deal with, something we battle with. But I think there's something in this that feels like, now, when I get through this hard time, then I'm going to really enjoy life. This is going to be good now. And I'm thinking that this is the year that, everything's going to go very, very smoothly. And here's what the more I study the Bible, the more I study human nature, the more I live life myself. I've come to believe that if you're alive and breathing, not only are you going to have some wonderful, wonderful days and some great, great experiences, but you're going to have some challenges and some difficulties. And it doesn't matter. It's real easy to look at somebody who's either their family seems all together and go, wow, seems like life's pretty easy for them. And probably if you got to know them real well and they were sitting down and talk to you about some of the problems that they may be facing or difficulty, you might decide to go ahead and keep your own problems. Even though it looks pretty good from the out, it looks good. But you say, well, I'll just go ahead and keep mine. You go ahead and keep yours. I'll keep mine. And then I think also, we can look at, from a financial standpoint, we look at people and say, man, if I just had what they have, I'd feel like life was going to be okay. And I've been blessed to know a few people over the years who have, had more than other people, that kind of thing. And let me just tell you, they face the same kind of things that anybody else does, and they actually even, even face some challenges that other people don't face. What I would say is, most of us would do well. Dave, I think, Anyway, Dave Cadden shared a message in our men's retreat about comparing ourselves to others. And I'm going to tell you, that might be one of those Wednesday night talks we end up doing too, because that was one of the best conversations or communications that I'd heard on that topic. And I will tell you, the comparison game will kill you. It will kill you. It will take every bit of joy you have right out. And so whenever we live life comparing ourselves to other people, some days we feel great. You compare yourself to what seems to be like a loser, you feel pretty good. But just hang on, because you're going to run into a winner in the next day or two, and then you're going to feel like, kind of a pile of trash. So the best thing to do is not compare ourselves with each other, but make sure that we are being who God designed us to be, and under His authority, and live in peace that He gives us in that context. So let me just say to you as we go into this, Moses, I don't think he had a mindset that said, well, when I get to this point, everything's going to be okay. But he did have a mindset that said, well, it seems like maybe I need to take things in my own hands. And I don't know if you've ever been there or not, but he operated that way. I want us to read the scripture in front of us, and then we're going to just have the memory verse there for your sake. Kind of goes along with the theme. But let's look at the scripture lesson. It says, and we're going to read two sections of scripture, one in chapter 3 of Exodus, and the next one chapter 4. Of course, it covers a whole lot more scripture than that, and we're going to talk about, but I'm just going to make reference to. I'm not going to read more than this. But follow along. This is kind of lengthy, but I believe that it is worthy of our reading, okay? Now, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. So not only is it burning and not burning up on fire, but not burning up, it's also a talking bush, okay? So you talk about kind of probably a little bit of your hair stand up on your neck there. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the Lord, and I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites. Anyway, Greg's not here this morning. He's our Hebrew linguist. And I know some of the rest of you are Arab linguists and that kind of stuff, but you know, at least you don't know Hebrew. So you know, and I know this isn't Hebrew. So, but at the same time, here, anyway, now I lost where I was. I was in the ites section. In the ites, okay, Hivites and Jebusites, and now the city of the Israelites has reached me. Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. And I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Now I just want to stop there for a minute. Most of you probably know a little bit of the history, have at least watched a movie on Moses or, you know, something like that. And here's what grabbed me as I read that, and you put yourself in that context, and you're going, if you know the backstory, you know that Moses was hidden in the rushes as a baby because he was supposed to be killed. And we're going to talk about these things coming up just briefly, but I just want to mention it here. So he was supposed to have been killed because he was born to slaves, and all the boys were supposed to be killed. He wasn't. He was hidden. Pharaoh's daughter found him. She fell in love with him. She let Moses' actual mother nurse him, raise him up to a certain point. Then she adopted him into her family. And he was raised with great privilege in Pharaoh's household. And then, so he had the best education. He had the best of everything, even though he was born as a slave. Had the best of everything that Egypt could offer, which was the best that could be offered at that time period in any place in the world. And then, as a young adult, he, or at least I guess young adult for as long as he lived, he actually decided. Those were his people. He knew they were his people. And he saw one of these slave masters beating one of the Hebrews. And he dove in, killed the guy, buried him in a shallow grave. And then he found out the next day he started to try to settle a dispute between two Israelites, two Hebrews. And in the midst of that, one of them said, oh, what are you going to do? Kill me like you did the Egyptian? So he knew the word was out. So he ran for his life. And he's been out here hiding for about 40 years. Now, God shows up and is just talking to him. Now, that's Moses' history. And of course, we know God knows his history. And Moses has had a whole lot of time to think about this while he's out here with these sheep and these flocks. And God shows up in a burning bush and starts talking to him. And he tells him, he says, I've seen the misery of you. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. One of the guys Moses killed, because Moses had seen them oppressing the people too. So it's almost like I can picture Moses. Why are we bringing this up? I mean, you know, I already went down this road one time. Why are we bringing this up? And then you go on down a little further into verse 10 or verse 9. Pardon me. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians oppress them. So now, go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Just like, I mean, do you know how God comes across to us sometimes? Like, okay, Moses, I've seen this stuff. It doesn't bring up anything like, well, I know you saw it too, and I know you tried it. Now, he just says, I've seen this stuff, and so I'm going to go ahead and send you. You go ahead and go and let him go. Moses, I mean, you have to understand the feelings of Moses is feeling right here. So Moses, verse 11, says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Now, his who am I is saying, I'm the guy who killed one of these guys. I'm the guy who ran for my life. Why do you think I'm out here on the backside of the desert with these sheep? Because I had to run for my life. Because I already tried it and it didn't work. God said, I'll be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And I think if I were Moses, I'd be thinking, oh, after I've brought them out, you're going to show me this sign. You know, I need a little encouragement right now before I go. And so Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Now that I am is a big deal, and you'll see it even in the New Testament when Jesus speaks to people and they're questioning his deity. And so this is a big deal. And so he says this, and then verse 15, God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Now, let's jump on over to on the back side of your sheet, and let's look at chapter 4. We've jumped ahead just a little bit here into the story, but it's still continuing this conversation. This is beginning at verse 1 of chapter 4. Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Now there I said, that guy's pretty smart. He saw that snake and he goes, I don't care if that came out of my hand or not, I'm running. He ran. I thought, well, that boy's he's got it going on. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. Again, this faith thing God asks us to do sometimes, isn't it irritating almost? Like, you really want me to do that? And so anyway, he did. So Moses reached out, took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand in his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. Now, put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses put his hand back in his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. So Moses appeared to maybe stutter. And he's, with everything else, in a sense, he had going for him, it seems like that this was maybe one area of impediment he did actually have. And so the Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. I remember hearing a person with cerebral palsy. I believe that's what he had. Many years ago, he may still be on the speaking circuit. And he's very difficult. He was on whenever Dr. Dobson was the one leading Focus on the Family. That was the first place that I heard him speak. And it was difficult to hear him speak, but he was a very good speaker, very good communicator. And so I remember I was fascinated with him and listened all the way through, but he had a very much of a speech impediment, and so you had to really listen carefully. What I remember is when he got to the end and he'd been talking about how God had worked in his life and worked through him and that kind of thing. And he said these words. He said, I think it was his closing statement. He said, and I'm not going to try to say it like he did, but it was very hard to understand, but you could get it. He said, I have cerebral palsy. What's your excuse? What's your excuse? And I thought, wow, wait, isn't that true that we often just come up with anything we can to tell God, well, I can't do this, I can't do that, or even just to take some of the challenges in life and just try to push back from it. and not press into it. And so Moses is doing this, but God reminded him, said, listen, do you think I mean, here's the thing what God was definitely saying. Do you think I came to you not aware of this? Since I'm the person who made you and knows you very well, you think I'm unaware of this? And so God's saying, if I'm going to ask you to go do this, I have this. But sometimes God does accommodate our weaknesses, and I believe He always will help us with them. And so then verse 13, Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord. Here's the truth. Moses just didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do it. He said, please send someone else. Please send someone else. Really, we're at the truth of the matter right now. He's just really saying, I just don't want to do it. Is it possible that after 40 years of running around in the backside of the desert by himself and these sheep, that he was thinking, I've seen people have these kind of things on their refrigerators before, or maybe on their car. The more I get to know people, the better I like my dog. How many of you have that? No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to. You're here. You must like people. Okay, you're here. You're here with us. But I think all of us have had those times and those days when we're going, just give me anything else but people. I don't want to be around people. I have a funny feeling Moses had enough of his feel of people, and he was thinking, these sheep are dumb, and they get in a lot of trouble, and they cause me headaches and everything else, but they don't talk back to me. They don't tell me. They don't accuse me. They don't, it's like he'd just kind of gotten used to this isolated lifestyle, and the idea of going back where he had been and confronting all of that just sounded so hard to him. And like, God, I've done this 40 years. I am really comfortable out here talking to these sheep. I am really comfortable out here. Just send somebody else. Why don't you just send somebody else? Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, what about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. God's saying, Moses, I'm picking you because you're a person of great faith. I've chosen you for this great task. But you're still doubting that I can do what I say I would do. You're doubting. So guess what? I'm going to give you a crutch. I'm going to give you your brother. And as close as he and his brother were, his brother also created some problems for him too along the way. And that's, the thing, sometimes we ask God for stuff and he gives it to us, but understand that has its own set of problems too. And I'm not here to talk about that so much today. But what I want us to do is to look a little bit at this school of hard knocks at Moses, that Moses experienced. And then also talk a little bit about what I think God wants to redemptively do through the process of us enrolling or being a part of a school of hard knocks. I want to say this, and I want to say this because Moses is a really good person to say this from, and that is, God is a redemptive God. That is his nature, is redemption. And in his redemption, he takes every experience that we have and is looking for a way to redeem that if we allow him to. And we can tend to look at bad situations or bad mistakes we've made in the past, and we can look at those and we can say, that's terrible. I wish I could erase that off of my life. I wish I could get rid of that. I wish that wasn't there. And God is saying, listen, it is there. You can't erase it. You can't get rid of it. But what you can do is be forgiven from it, and also let me work redemptively through those mistakes, through those problems, and see what I can do. And that's exactly what God was doing in Moses' life. Now, I want you to think in terms of your own life, your own situation, and maybe try to evaluate a little bit of, they won't be the same as Moses, but just think through a little bit as we talk about this, a couple of things that maybe you have experienced that you would say, someone else put me in that school of hard knocks. That was a hard learning curve, hard learning lesson, or something that you did yourself. let's just look at a couple, first of all, that where other people enrolled Moses in the school of hard knocks. Pharaoh's, his life interacted with different pharaohs quite a bit. Pharaoh enrolled Moses in a school of hard knocks he had no choice over, and that was he made a decree that all the baby boys that were born would be killed to the Israelites, that they would be killed because he felt like they were multiplying, they were just starting to cover the land. He was afraid that they might, come up against the Egyptians, or someone else came against the Egyptians, that they would join in with them and fight against the Egyptians. And so he said, we got to control the population. And so he said, all of the baby boys will be killed. And you just think about the implications of that. Now, there's also another piece of that story where the midwives actually didn't obey his orders, and God rewarded them for not obeying his orders because by giving them a family of their own. They had not had a family of their own, by giving them a family of their own. But that's another story for another day. But so Moses was born. The day he was born was a day that the decree was out that any boy that's born should be killed. And so his life was threatened before he was born. I mean, he was to be killed once he was born. And this isn't a sermon about abortions, but we do live in a time period today where this stuff is going on for unborn children today. We live in a time period where kids, it's a threat to be born, or to be someone who's being conceived in this culture. Your life is up for threat. But again, that's not my theme of my subject, or it's not my subject today, but I still sometimes think this many years later that in a so-called civilized nation that this is a part of what's happening. But Pharaoh, so what happened to Moses was, instead of him being killed, his mother hid him. She hid him for 3 months around the house. And I can imagine that there must have been a point where, she had him under the sink, or she had him someplace else, or whatever, and he was crying, and it's like, so people are going to hear this, people are going to know. So then she made this little basket, waterproof basket, and put him in the Nile, and stationed his older sister Miriam to be out there watching. And that was whenever Pharaoh's daughter came along. The little baby was crying when they opened it up. She fell in love with him, and Miriam, Moses' sister, said, "Would you want me to go find a Hebrew slave who could nurse him?" And obviously the logical person was the mother, and I think that Pharaoh's daughter was unaware of that, and so she went along with that and said yes. And so Moses' mom actually got paid to raise Moses. It says that she paid her mom to raise him. And so she raised him up to a certain point, probably, I don't know exact age, but to a certain point while he's still a young boy, and then turned him over to Pharaoh's daughter, so he was adopted into the Pharaoh's family. So his death threat, him having to be in the Nile, there with crocodiles in that area around, he survived that. He was adopted. He was raised as an Egyptian, even though he very much knew and understood that he was an Israelite, and that was his heritage. That's where he came from. And so Moses went through a lot of things up to his adulthood that he had no control over. He could not control any of those circumstances whatsoever. But then he became an adult. And not everybody waits till they're an adult, and probably he didn't, we just may not know about it, to enroll themselves in the school of hard knocks. But then Moses went ahead and enrolled himself in the school. That wasn't enough that other people enrolled him in. He decided to enroll himself. And so what he does, he goes out one day, and I'm sure that he must have had some kind of a sense that God's hand was on him in a special way, and that God was wanting to use him maybe in a special way with regard to his people being Israelites, and that he did hold a special position. He was a part of Pharaoh's family. He was a part of the number one family in Egypt. And so he was in the power. He was in the seat of power. He was in that community of power. So I'm sure there was a sense in which he felt somewhat empowered to work toward the delivery of his people. But he didn't have a plan necessarily, except one day whenever he was out there and he saw one of the slave masters beating one of his fellow countrymen. And something that we haven't mentioned yet, because it probably just reared its head at this point, that we are aware of. But it appears as though that Moses may have had an anger management problem. How many of you, no, don't raise your hand. That's not the thing to raise your hand on. This isn't CR, is it? Okay, so if we're in CR, we go, how many of you want to say, my name is Rod and I have an anger problem, you know? Then that, but that, we don't do that on Sunday morning. You can just pretend like you don't, but don't go on pretending too long. But listen, Moses had an anger problem. And I don't know if you have ever had an anger problem, guess what it will do? It will give you problems. It will become a problem for you. Not just a problem for other people, it will become a problem for you. I have 3 brothers. Now, my oldest brother, Rick, he's 4 years older than I am. He's the one we're praying for, a heart transplant. Please keep praying for that. That God will heal him or give him a new heart. Don't have any good update at this point. We're just sort of still in that flow. But one of the things that he was 4 years older than I was, and he was always big as when he was growing up, and so I don't ever remember like having a little anger episode at him or anything like that. But I do my brother just older than I am, my brother younger than I am, and so there were a few times where I got really mad and did something, and they're great brothers, so they hardly ever bring it up. But every once in a while, something will spark that, and there's been a few times I've even brought it up, say, you want me to revert back to blah, blah, you know? And so in both cases, I particularly think of an incident with each of them where in my anger, I hurt one of them, actually, because I threw something, hit him in the head. And the other one, I almost hurt him. I stopped myself before I did, but I almost hurt him. And I mean, in the sense of like, you know, something that would have really hurt, and kind of caught myself right before I did. That was my younger brother, so thank God. My older brother, he had less to hold over my head than my younger brother did. So anyway, but what I you know, I look back at both of those situations, and I think, you know what, I could have that could have been like a serious injury. Both of those could have been serious injuries. Just because I flew off the handle in a moment of anger and just reacted without thinking. And I'll tell you, you can do a lot of serious damage. And so what Moses did, I mean, that made him really mad to see. And there was probably an element of that could have been righteous indignation. But he went ahead and took it to the point of killing the guy, you know. And it doesn't say, you know, how he killed him exactly, but I could just about imagine he strangled the guy to death or something, you know. But he killed him. And then dug a real shallow grave and threw the guy in it. And like, okay, just kind of go on here, you know. I kind of hate that happened and everything, but I showed him, didn't I? Well, the next day, he was out, and 2 of the Hebrew guys were fighting each other. And he stepped into it, and one of them said, who's appointed you a judge over us, and what are you going to do, kill me just like you did the Egyptian yesterday? And so at that moment, Moses, really the day before when he killed the Egyptian, he enrolled himself that moment in the school of hard knocks. And he took off for his life, because it said that Pharaoh was looking for him to kill him. Took off for his life, and he ran to the backside of the desert. And he stayed out there for 40 years. I hope nobody does a 40-year stint in the school of hard knocks, okay? But it is possible. It is possible. But even if you do, what I want you to know is God's not done with you yet. He's still not done. He still has more for you to do, more for you to be. And Moses, listen, there was a lot of learning that Moses took in out there in that desert that served him very well as a leader of people through that desert in the next 40 years. And so it wasn't, that's where I'm saying God is a redemptive God. God didn't tell him to kill that guy, but since he killed him, went out there, he sure gave him a lot of knowledge about that area before he ended up having to take a whole hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people across that area. And so there was good that came out of it. He also, after he was leading the children of Israel, if you remember the incident whenever they were all complaining about needing drink and everything else, and Moses got angry, that anger thing popped back up again, and he whacked that rock and didn't do things the way God told him to do, and that cost him going into the promised land. It's a consequence. Even as a great spiritual leader, he still threw himself into the school of hard knocks. I say that only to say this. I don't think any of us should ever think we've so graduated from the school of hard knocks that we would never ever have to attend again. The only way that you know you're not going to have to ever attend again is for us to attend your funeral. Then we'll know you crossed over. You're there. But I think as long as we live, it's possible that we can do something that will put us into a school of hard knocks. Now we hope, again, like you said, it's a graduate level class, or it's for a PhD or something else. It's not. We're not back doing the same class over again. I think I shared this one time, but I was at out here in Richmond County. Actually, there were several people that were taking these classes to be able to get off of probation, and I went in just to kind of see what it was all about. I was trying to understand the process, and I wasn't there by court order anyway. That's what I'm trying to say. But I was there of my own volition at that point. All right, and I'd like to keep it that way. But I was there to be of help to some others, and the guy who was in charge, the parole officer that was in charge, he was a big guy, and so his very presence was kind of intimidating. And he was in a uniform and had a gun on his side and all that stuff. And he got up and he said, and he was talking about this intro class that they were having to take. You have to go through this one, then you go through this one and this one. And he says, so everybody here this morning, you're here this morning because you have to go through that entry class, that entry level class. And there was a guy sitting in there that raised his hand. And he said, sir, I've already taken that class 3 times. So I guess am I going to the other class? He said, like I said, everybody in this room is taking the entry-level class. And if you're here taking the entry-level class for your 4th time, there's a reason why you're here for the 4th time. Yes, you're taking the entry-level class. So it's like, well, at that point, I'm sure he was wishing he had never raised his hand and said anything. But I will tell you, there are times whenever we have to take the entry-level class more than once, right? Sometimes whenever it's like, it's a repeat. In the school of hard knocks, this school of life will let us take it as many times as we want. And so but what I would say is most of the people in that class were taking it for their first time, but this guy's like, oh, I've already been here, It's like the person who called me and said, hey, do you do marriages, Pastor? And I didn't know them from Adam, just someone called me out of the phone book. And I said, well, I do. And they said, well, would you mind marrying us? I said, well, I might. But I said, I'll need to meet you guys first. And I said, I do require 6 sessions of pre-marriage counseling. And she said, well, that wouldn't work for us. And I said, well, why not? She goes, well, we're getting married tomorrow. And I said, well, then I'm not the person to do that. And she goes, no. She said, it'd be fine. We've been married before. We know all about marriage. Anyway, so sometime this afternoon you'll think that through and go, oh yeah, that's what he meant by that. But so, and they probably did learn a lot. But the fact that you're doing it again might mean you might need to learn something else, right? So anyway, this school of hard knocks thing is not, it isn't one of those things just because you went, you're done. I've been there, I did that one. Okay, just remember you can always go back. And you can always even go back and repeat the same class. It's amazing to me sometimes, and I'm a human being, and I know my own nature, and I know the tendency for us to repeat not only good things, but also to repeat bad things. And so there's that human tendency in all of us to sometimes go back into the same places we've been before and do the same thing over again, and somehow expect different results. And so we find ourselves in those places sometimes. And so here he is, he's out here, he's been a leader, he's organized this whole group, but he rams that rock with his staff, and he disobeys God, and as a result, he doesn't get to go in the promised land. So All I'm saying is, I think what makes Moses a very positive person for us is the fact that he was very human. He was a God man without doubt. He was a person of unbelievable faith and courage, but he also, his weaknesses showed up as well. And so sometimes that gives us hope to say, you know what, I know that God uses me. I know he does good things, but I also know there's things like sometimes that I struggle, and I'm struggling with something, and understand Moses did too. Now, I want to give you a couple lessons that come out of what I believe for any of us that can come out of this school of hard knocks. And the first one is to remember, and I've already mentioned this to you, but I want to remind you, to remember that God wants to work redemptively from those experiences. You know, right here among us, if I took the time, I could walk through several stories represented right here in this place of people who have, this section of their life was maybe dominated by drugs or alcohol or a series of just bad choices. But they have moved out of that class into a place of not only letting God redeem their life, but turning around and reinvesting everything they learned in this experience in helping other people with the same kinds of experiences. And whenever I see that at work, when I see that happen, when I see that in people's lives, I'm saying, you know, God, that's just the kind of God you are. In some situations, we see it more clearly than others. In some situations, we're able to be more aware of it than others. But what God wants to do is work redemptively. Look, you know, you can look back and go, sometimes you look back and go, well, that's just a bad place in my life. Here's what we really need to say is, God, what did I learn from that bad place that would be a blessing to other people? What did I learn from that bad place that I can actually give you praise for what you've done in my life, where you've brought me to this point? You know, and you know, we've seen this happen over and over and over again in the years of people in financial difficulties who have been diligent and faithful to follow basically God's principles in how they manage their finances, and God given them opportunities. And through those opportunities, they've been able to come to a whole different place of living financially. And then also those who just you know, physically, spiritually, where, again, like I said, the drugs or alcohol or other kinds of addictive behaviors or patterns in their lives were dominating or destroying or damaging them. And to move from that to a place of, instead of that controlling them, then being controlled by God's Spirit and being able to help others who find themselves there. And so the number one thing I want you to remember is this. Whatever your school of hard knocks has been, or if you happen to be in one right now, God wants to use it. He will use it. God did not waste Moses' 40 years in the backside of the desert. He was in the Moses didn't know this, but he was preparing Moses. He had all this formal education back in Egypt. Now he had all this practical education out here in the backside of the desert. And now he was the person God said, you're ready. You're ready. And Moses was surprised. Me? I'm the guy? You got to be kidding. I'm the one who messes things up. I'm the one who goofs it all up. I'm the one who did it all the wrong way. And God's saying, and that's really one of the reasons why you're qualified to help other people do it right. Because you know, not only have you known from doing it right, but you've known from doing it wrong. And I'm ready to use you. I'm ready to step into this. Moses was scared. He was upset. He was comfortable. But God said, got to push you out of this nest. You've been in the school long enough. It's time for you to get the job. Go ahead and we're going to give you the job of the one who's going to release the children of Israel from Egypt. So, first thing is, remember, God will redeem that situation. The second thing is this. You can use the school of hard knocks for good, or you can let it be a very negative thing in your life. You know, something that I used to tell myself when I was doing, I was taking classes, going through school, was this. And sometimes, you get a little fatigued and you're going, oh man, I'm never going to graduate. I'm never going to get there. I just felt like it was always that elusive thing out there. And something that I used to tell myself was this: Rod, this next semester, it's your plan to live those months. You're going to live those months. You're going to do something in those months. You're going to work. You're going to do and so if you go to class and just do your best, when those months are over, you'll have that semester behind you. So sometimes I just had to have like these little Rod talks and say, okay, I can't look at the degree out there right now. What I'm going to look at is this semester. And I have a job. I know my job. I know what it is, and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do that. If I sign up for the classes, then I'll find myself finishing that in that time as well. Guess what? I'm going to end up here whether I do the classes or don't do the classes. I'd rather go ahead and end up here having done the classes. So I would push through and get there. And here's what I want to say. Sometimes, even if we have put ourselves in the school of hard knocks, or even if someone else, the outcome of that really depends on how we embrace it or how we resist it. Do you know that there are some people who do time, and then because they fight against the time so much and they cause so much trouble in that time, they end up doing double time? There are people who've gone into prison. We're only going to spend 3 years, and they end up spending their whole life there. You know why? Now, some things can happen that are out of someone's control, but sometimes it's because they decided, instead of doing the time, to do something else that would get them more time and more time. See, how you use the time you have that you're given. You say, well, this stinks. I'm going to be stuck doing this 2 years. Well, you can live life feeling stuck, or you can embrace it and say, this is what I'm going to be doing for the next 2 years. And I'm going to have to work at having a good attitude. I'm going to have to work at, but I'm going to learn everything I can learn from this process. Because here's what's going to happen. The 2 years is going to come and go. Whatever you do or don't do, however you respond or don't respond. I have to believe that Moses' 40 years out there on the backside of the desert weren't wasted. Even though he emotionally didn't feel ready when God called him, he had been putting into practice some good things. And those good things showed up when he stood in front of Pharaoh. And he said, let my people go. And whenever he stood in front of the Red Sea, with the army behind him, with the mountain beside him, with the water in front of him, and the people were saying, you brought us out here to kill us. You brought us out here to get killed. You brought us out here. And in that moment, instead of Moses freaking out, he raises his rod over the water and it parts. And they walk through on dry land. See, I believe God developed something in that man in the backside of the desert as he embraced that experience. In fact, he embraced it so much, he was saying, God, no, I'll just stay here. I'll stay here. God said, no, you graduate today. You graduate today, and you're going to go and do what it is I've called you to do. Now, let me quickly say this before I close. He did not graduate to a life with no problems. He graduated to a life of great usefulness. As long as we live, we're going to have problems. So don't think, boy, I cannot wait until I get to that point where life is smooth sailing. If it's in this life here, where it's 100% smooth sailing, that means we could come and visit you and you wouldn't know we were there. If you think life is smooth sailing, it probably means that you've got a serious dose of Alzheimer's or something, You're not aware of what's going on around you. As long as you're aware of what's going on around you, there's going to be some challenge, going to be some problems. The question is, will those problems define you, or will they strengthen you.